The virtues of Euphrasie Barbier, the foundress of Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions. Cardinal virtues. There are 4 primary moral virtues, which are called the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Prudence, which is an intellectual virtue, is the wisdom that guides practical decision-making. Justice governs human relationships and social interaction. Fortitude refers to human commitment and inner strength. Temperance is the means by which we regulate or moderate our appetites and emotions. Part 5. Temperance. I appeal to you, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. The quote from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, aptly describes the disposition of Euphrasie Barbier's entire life, which became a living sacrifice, as she humbly and continuously sought the will of God, without pretension or any form of aggrandisement. She continuously sought to control her ego, so that it was not I, but Christ who lives in me, and derived from this the strength of will to temper and transform the tenacity of character which was natural to her. According to the Catholic Catechism, temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasures and provides balance in the use of created goods. It ensures the will's mastery over instincts and keeps desires within the limits of what is honourable. The temperate person directs the sensitive appetites toward what is good and maintains a healthy discretion. The servant of God understood well that in order to follow the will of God, the practice of the moral virtue of temperance would support her desire for complete submission of self. In her relationships with others, in her business dealings, in her apostolic ventures, and in her vowed life, she sought only God's good pleasure. Temperance, a means of giving glory to God. In a letter to Father Philpin de Rivière, Euphrasie Barbier expressed the virtue of temperance in her desire that at all times the very dear and loving will of God might reign and be master in the very depths of my soul, in my whole being, and in every creature. The constitutions, which reflected her own spirituality, published in 1871 and revised in 1891, also sought the same end, the glory of God. The simple and upright soul, according to the heart of God, does not keep going back on the past, nor look forward vainly to the future, but concentrates all her strength in the present moment, and sees only the good pleasure of God. She has only one focus, one desire, one motto: God alone, His will, His glory. Olivier also comments on this, saying, Euphrasie Barbier had no other ambition for herself, or for her sisters than to seek in everything the glory of the Father. She rarely sought it in the beauty of nature or in human works of art. She was not insensitive to them, however. When 2 new buildings were being constructed, she wrote, "May every brick of these 2 new monasteries proclaim the glory of the Lord our God." Temperance, the practice of asceticism. The influence of Jansenism, which had pervaded much of the European Church in the 19th century, as well as the effects of the French Revolution with its ongoing consequences, influenced the devotional practices of the Church in France. Paul Evdokimov, when writing of such practices during this era, said, "Mortification became a means for satisfying the divine justice and for saving sinners. It was the shock of the Revolution that increased practices of reparative penance and expiatory asceticism." Euphrasie Barbier regularly practiced acts of mortification and of penance, including fasting, use of the discipline, wearing of a hair shirt and small chains, but always with the permission of her spiritual directors. She never, however, imposed such acts of reparative penance and expiatory asceticism on her sisters. In no way did they diminish her numerous responsibilities or lessen her cheerful disposition. Temperance, moderation and simplicity of life. Euphrasie Barbier took seriously the rule of St. Augustine with its foundational message of one soul, one heart, entirely centered on God, and the call to common life as expressed in Article 3. Thus, you read in the Acts of the Apostles, they had everything in common, and distribution was made to each as any had need. Consequently, this ideal of living a God-centered, common life with an absence of self-seeking was lived wholeheartedly by Euphrasie Barbier. Euphrasie Barbier practiced moderation and simplicity in her own life to a heroic degree. For example, although smallpox had all but ruined her digestive system, making it difficult for her to eat anything other than easily digested food, she continued to observe fasts and refused any special consideration. Even in the last weeks of her life, she asked her sisters to treat her as the poor would be treated in hospital, refusing to eat any food that was not readily available to the poor. A small sample of quotes taken from the directory written by Euphrasie Barbier shows that she also encouraged the virtue of temperance, moderation and simplicity in the lives of her sisters. The sisters will be on their guard against seeking for praise, distinction, or admiration from creatures. On the contrary, they will love to occupy the last place, or perform the humblest functions. They will be careful not to give the body undue care. They will give it what is reasonably necessary in order that it cooperate with the soul in the works of zeal, but they will mortify it in all that would cause it to be an obstacle to these works. They will practice simplicity in their whole bearing. Everything in them should breathe forth innocence, candour, and a dignified and refined manner, yet without stiffness and without ostentation. Based on the testimony of the sisters who were her contemporaries, Abbé Coulomb wrote of these last days of her life. The sisters bought a little fur rug to cover her chest, but she strongly objected and refused to take it. A fur rug for me? For whom do they take me? The Divine Master would certainly not recognize me. No, no. Let it be given to some sick person in the town. That would be more becoming. Simplicity was also the hallmark of Euphrasie Barbier's personal appearance. Her dress was remarkably unostentatious. Her tunic, veil, and mantle, all well patched, were made of the type of material worn by the poorest classes of her times. She and her sisters often made their own shoes, a craft she had learned from her father. She insisted, however, on neatness, cleanliness, and dignity. Temperance, a balanced life. In her dealings with her sisters and others, the servant of God insisted on maintaining a balanced approach to life. She believed in preventative measures being used to maintain the health of the children and sisters in her care, such as heating in the bedrooms and matting on the floors. Always solicitous for the infirm, she made sure that nutritious food and warm clothing was provided for them. Her balanced and kindly approach overflowed into other dimensions of life for those for whom she was responsible. We see this in a letter she wrote about 2 young women from Futuna, Oceania, who were interested in religious life. In my opinion, the life of these young girls must not be the kind of life practiced in the novitiate. They may achieve that later if they are not given what I call indigestion of devotion and a rule beyond their reach. She also encouraged her sisters to maintain a healthy balance in their apostolic works. Do not think, because you are not able to do all you would wish to do, that everything is lost. No, no. What you will not be able to do in the first year, do in the second. Just remain calm and maintain your union with God. At a time when religious prejudice was rife in France, it was wiser for the sisters to wear secular dress when sitting public examinations. Her practicality and her feminine sensibility are clearly seen in a letter she wrote to the superior in Lyon regarding the clothes to be worn by these younger women. Don't let them be dressed in a ridiculous fashion. It is not a question of vanity, but of a suitable propriety. They must look respectable, and do not need to be exactly the same. See that everything is arranged for them with sensitivity and good taste. Make sure they are carrying sufficient money for their journey and their board. In another letter to sisters engaged in the education of children in New Zealand, she encouraged them to cultivate polite, gentle, and refined manners. This is more important than you think. We must give the example, no affectation, but a genuine refinement after the example of Mary. Conclusion. Ample evidence from her own writings, from her biography, from witnesses who knew her, and those who gave testimony in recent times, show beyond doubt that, throughout her life, Euphrasie Barbier practiced to a heroic degree the cardinal virtue of temperance. She repeatedly encouraged her sisters to develop an attitude of humility and a great confidence in God and not in yourself. Say in the depth of your heart, I am nothing, but I can do all things in Jesus Christ who strengthens me. She offered herself as a spiritual sacrifice, refusing to let the attractions of the world distract her from the spiritual task of letting God's grace transform and renew her mind in order to recognize the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.